Okay, so there's 12 concepts to cover. 4 in week 1, 4 in week 2, 4 in week 3. Okay, each of the 3 weeks I've put in your readings so you don't have to keep going back to your syllabus or your modules. They're all in here. I've copy and pasted them. All right. So we've covered all 3 weeks. This exam is for weeks 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so everything's organized in weeks for concepts. So you have your week 1 concepts, which are listed up here. They go in order. Okay, this is going to look similar to your notes, your weekly notes. This is just an abbreviated version. Okay, your notes are very detailed information that's pulled together from my lecture, from readings about the big picture of the concept. When we get into studying for exams, I like to pull out the more important things for you to cover to understand the concept. All right, so it's an abbreviated version. Okay, so I would start with reviewing this concept guide. Okay, if you get to introduction to community nursing, you read through this information, you say, I'm just not getting it yet. I need to go back and reread that section of my notes. All right, so you have a couple of places to go if you're not getting it from this concept guide. You go back to your weekly notes, all right, in week 1 for introduction to community nursing. If you're still not getting it, go back to your week 1 reading and look at where community nursing was introduced. Right here, introduction to community nursing. All right, go back and reread that section. Same for the second one, levels of healthcare prevention. If you're not understanding it based on the information in the concept guide, go back to week 1 and say, well, let me go back and review levels of prevention. Okay, and these were in your Canvas course, right? We all know the difference. Your readings are either in the books or they're in the Canvas module. Everybody know that, right?
Yep.
So that's how it's set up. It's really simple. Okay, so if you have a good understanding of this concept guide, you're going to do fine on the exam. Remember Next Gen. Okay, these exams are not meant to test your definition knowledge. They're meant that you have you possess the knowledge, the critical thinking, and you can take that critical thinking with each concept and apply it to clinical judgment in a clinical setting. Okay, that's Next Gen focused. Am I doing okay with my sound? Is everything staying on?
Yes, so good.
Okay, great. All right. So for example, somebody tell me what the difference is between community-oriented nursing and community-based nursing. What's the difference?
We orient around the community and then based around the individual.
Correct. So if you're a community-based nurse, you're based in the community. You may be a school nurse, you may be a hospice nurse, you may be a occupational health nurse, you may be a palliative care nurse, an immunization nurse. You're working with individuals in the community. Where if you're working as a community-oriented nurse, that's often synonymous with public health nurse, right? You're working around with the whole community, the whole population. You're trying to be focused on health promotion rather than illness care. Okay? Levels of healthcare prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary. You have to be able to take each concept we're covering, such as what we did this week. The migrant farm worker, the rural population, the homeless client, the family or individual lives in poverty. Okay, those specific concepts, they all have primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions, but you have to be able to apply each level of intervention to that specific group. So for example, a primary intervention for a migrant farm worker may be, like our quiz question said, teach them the precautions of sun exposure, right? Before it even happens. Well, for the homelessness, what would a primary prevention be? What would be something to prevent homelessness? Maybe teaching them about healthy lifestyles, about healthy diet, about knowing when you're in financial crisis, trying to prevent something before it happens. Okay, so there's different levels. Primary will look different with a homeless person, a migrant farm worker, a rural population, and somebody living in poverty. Same with secondary. Let's do secondary. We had a question on quiz 2 about secondary screening. Okay, so let's say you're presented with the client, migrant farm workers who live in a small house with lots of people. What are we going to screen them for?
TB.
TB. Okay, let's go to the homeless population. Okay, we know that there are risks for maybe infectious disease, communicable diseases.
AIDS.
What might we screen them for?
Would it be HIV or AIDS?
Yeah, maybe substance abuse issues, maybe alcohol issues, right? Tertiary. Okay, let's say you're a migrant farm worker and you've had an exposure to pesticides. We're treating that exposure to pesticides. They've had it, right? Or maybe a homeless person, tertiary, they're already homeless. So what are we doing to help them? Maybe providing them resources, providing them a voucher for a doctor's visit, providing them whatever they need. Does that make sense? So primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions are with every single concept. I mean, they're not, it's kind of hard to do concepts for like introduction to community nursing or level or healthy people 2030. But when we get down to school nursing and family nursing, family health risks, we can identify primary, secondary, and tertiary. It's just depending on what concepts you're covering. There's different primary interventions for all these 4 that we covered this week. There's secondary for all these 4. There's tertiary for all these 4. Does that make sense? So you just have to be able to identify what does prevention look like with the migrant farm worker? What does prevention look like for the homelessness? What does prevention look like for the school nurse? What does prevention look like when you're assessing family risks? Okay. Healthy People 2030, you simply need to know what their overarching goals are, right? It is a national initiative, okay, to improve the health of everybody. Specifically here, one of their goals is to reduce firearm related deaths. Okay, so let's say when we're evaluating a client's home for safety that has a firearm, what's the priority for the nurse? The priority is to find out where that firearm is stored. Priority. Okay, if you walk into a home and you ask, do you have a firearm or not? And the answer is no, fine. If it's yes, you need to see where that firearm is stored, right? And you need to make sure that firearm is unloaded and locked. Okay, this is a Healthy People 2030 initiative to reduce firearm related deaths. How do we go about that in the community setting? Number 1, find out if they have a firearm, find out if it's stored, and then find out if it's stored properly. Social determinants of health. We talked about that last week, have a major impact on people's health, well-being, and quality of life. Okay, so here's 6 bullets on some different social determinants of health. Do people have safe housing? Do they have transportation? Do they have safe neighborhoods? Is there racism, discrimination, or violence in their communities? Is there quality education, job opportunities, and income? Okay, so these things determine the health of the individual, the health of the community, right? So if you don't have safe housing, if you don't have transportation, if there is racism, discrimination, violence, if there's poor education, if there's a lack of job opportunities, if a lot of people live in poverty, if there's not a lot of access to nutritional foods and physical activities, okay, those things determine the health of the individual or the unhealth of the individual or the community, right? Introduction to vulnerability. There's a whole bunch of points about this. Okay, so when you look at these, think about, okay, go ahead. So if you look at the first bullet, vulnerable populations, who are they? Poor, homeless, pregnant teens, veterans, migrant workers, on and on. Think about what kind of question might you get? Who are vulnerable populations?
Select all that apply question.
Yeah. Maybe select all that apply who's vulnerable. Okay, so as you read through each bullet, think about what you might get asked. Clinically focused, social determinants of health, safe housing, transportation. We just went through all this. So what question might you get?
What could affect a person's health?
What kind of social determinants could affect a person's health? Right? Here's another one. Poverty is the primary cause of vulnerability. It's a growing problem. What kind of question? What's the primary cause of vulnerability? What's the answer?
Poverty.
Poverty. Okay, so as you're reading through this, think about questions that might get asked based on the information that's being provided to you. Okay, education plays a role, but not just related to income. Higher levels of education lead to better choices. Education also influences perceptions of stressors and the effects of stress. Higher education increases self-confidence and thus resiliency. So, what would be a question to be asked about that?
What would increase self-confidence and resiliency?
Yeah, what's resiliency? What contributes to higher resiliency?
Which is education.
Maybe higher education. Okay. Here's therapeutic communication. What's therapeutic communication all about? Respecting each individual as unique and worthy of your respect and kindness. Make no assumptions. So this is all about establishing trust and good communication skills with our vulnerable. Remember the section we're in, vulnerable people, right? Here's your resiliency information. How do we play a role in increasing resiliency? Okay, or lack of resiliency. What does that lead to? Individuals to make poor decisions, maybe worsening their circumstances. You've seen all of this in your notes. I'm just boiling it down to the talking points that will help you understand the concept. This is important. Introduction to vulnerability, caring for the caregivers of the chronically ill. What do we need to consider? Right? Caregivers of the chronically ill, they're also at risk for mental health related illnesses, burnout, stress. They're also at risk of neglect and abuse of their potential clients. Okay, if they develop mental illness or burnout or stress, that could lead to dangers for the client. Here's a primary prevention. Primary prevention includes educating them on stress and burnout. Maybe teaching them stress reduction techniques. We already know they're a high-risk group. Encouraging a support group with other caregivers. All right. Here's homeless and working with the homeless. It's important to create a trusting environment. This whole paragraph goes through the benefits of creating a trusting environment. And then this is kind of a summary of the homelessness population. We know it's correlated with health outcomes. How? Well, chronic illness, maybe HIV, psychological issues, substance abuse issues. We just went through this in class in the last couple of days. Okay, vulnerability can be reversed by obtaining resources to increase resilience, right? Learning the basic language of the country you're in will give immigrants the ability to communicate, navigate through the systems, decrease the barriers. Okay. And then week 2, we covered the school nurse. Okay, so you have about 8 bullets about the school nurse. Okay, we know one of the things that comes along with school nursing is identifying bullying, identifying harassment. It's not all about kids coming to the clinic and with stomach aches and needing Band-Aids. Let's say you have a student that comes to the clinic for the last 3 weeks at the same time every day, and she's complaining of a stomach ache. After 3 weeks, do we think she's got a stomach ache? Could there be other things going on? Where was she? What class is she in before she comes to the clinic? What's she avoiding? As school nurses, we have to be able to think outside the box. Okay, we know they come with headaches and stomach aches. However, at some point, when you've gone through all of your assessment, said, listen, you've been coming here for 3 weeks. I've talked to your mom or dad, whatever. No issues at home. What's going on? What's going on at school that you continue to come to the clinic? So that's the responsibility of a school nurse, is to look outside the box. Do your assessment, and if other things may be going on, you need to investigate that. Okay, they may be trying to escape a bully, maybe some kind of neglect or abuse going on. Talk to the teachers. Okay, school nurse also addresses obesity. Okay, why are obesity rates rising steadily? What can we do as school nurses? What can we do to teach the kids prevention strategies and what lifelong effects there are from obesity? Let's see. Unemployment and depression in the family is going to totally contribute to school behaviors. Right? Adjustment problems, behavioral problems, developmental delays. This issue's going on at home. Okay. What else here? School nurses' initial interactions with family. Okay, this is how do school nurses communicate with families? Right? What if you're working with families of immigrants that don't speak the language and you don't know the culture? What do you do? You ask,
You get a
right?
translator. Oh,
Yeah. This is culturally competent care. Right? As a school nurse, you have to be culturally competent in the population you're working with. Right? What is their
so like
culture?
know,
Pardon
so
me?
like know their culture, like understand.
Yeah. I mean, what if their culture is against immunizations? What if their culture is against certain food being served in the cafeteria? What if their culture prevents them from certain discipline at school? Important for you to know about those. And then the other part of school nursing is the adolescents who have begun dating. What do you do? How do you work with them with a primary intervention? Right? How do you assess them for risk, the risk of violence? Right? Open-ended questions describing their relationships. right? Domestic violence can begin very early in the teenage years, right? You need to be aware of that and be able to communicate the risks of complicated relationships in the teen years, right? We know that poverty in childhood increases the likelihood of potential abuse risk, food insecurity, and susceptibility to infections. It also leads to developmental delays that will impact academic progress on an ongoing basis. Okay, growth and development. Here you need to know the different with kids, with adolescents, with teens. Okay, it talks about regular checkups are recommended every couple of years to assess growth and development. Here it talks about immunizations and boosters when they're recommended between 4 and 6 years, and then 11 and 12. Okay, kids should be physically active for 30 to 60 minutes a day. Right, what do you do to a parent? How do you talk with a parent who may be hesitant to give vaccines, childhood vaccines, and maybe even the COVID vaccine? All you can do is educate them on the benefits, right? It's up to them. What about caring for the immunocompromised child and helping them prevent communicable diseases and infections in the home setting? There's a whole list of suggestions when you're working with parents right in here. Okay. Then the next section is the common childhood ailments. I'm going to let you guys go through this section on your own, but know that there's at least 1 or 2 questions on each of these. Okay. And I've whittled this down. Your weekly notes are much more detailed. I've tried to give maybe 6 to 8 bullets for each one. Okay. So you've got asthma, and also take from your discussion question information you just did for this week. It was for whichever ones you picked. You got your asthma, your eczema, your conjunctivitis, scabies, lice, ADHD, iron deficiency anemia, scoliosis, and lead exposure. Okay. Know the information. This is the med-surg part of your exam. Okay. And then what do we want to know about family and health, family nursing, family health risks? We know that obesity is one of the greatest health risks to children, right? In the primary prevention area, hopefully the community health nurse provides teaching about prevention and management. I did a lot of that in the middle schools and high schools, teaching about prevention. Right. And you can also do primary interventions with the parents, right? Helping the parents understand what does a healthy food choice look like. Okay. And then this week we just finished going through what are the most important facts to know about these special vulnerable populations? Well, we talked about migrant farm workers. We talked about certain risks, language barriers, cultural differences. Okay. Barriers to access, barriers to healthcare, barriers to special services. Are the services even affordable? Second paragraph has to do with pesticide poisoning. One of the most important risks for migrant populations, pesticide poisoning. And here it goes through what is an acute side effect, what is a chronic side effect. Okay. Review of the work site or the housing, migrant workers in their housing issues. Okay, maybe in poor condition, unsanitary. Right? Housing could be in camps or trailers or tents or cars. right? The poor quality and crowded places could lead to a potential exposure of TB. Migrant farm workers usually lack sources for information about available resources to them. Transportation is an issue. Language barrier is an issue. Okay. Rural population. Okay. We know that they're much less focused on primary care. Okay. How do you motivate this population? I don't think we covered much of that in class, but how do you, as a community nurse, how do you motivate the rural population to be engaged in primary care?
Okay.
Well, this talks about to understand motivation. How do you understand to understand motivation? What do we need to help this population with? Find out how they think about the health problem. Do they think it's serious or not? Do they think that if they go to the doctor, it will make a difference? Really important. This is a population that's very unmotivated. How do we get them motivated? Here's some suggestions. Okay, so motivation will be most directly impacted in a positive way by interventions, nursing interventions that provide information that is relevant. Okay, so if we can explain to somebody who we did a screening and they have high blood pressure. If we can explain to them the dangers of high blood pressure, the long-term effects of high blood pressure, provide them information that helps them understand the seriousness of high blood pressure, will they be more motivated to seek help? Then we talk about the more persistent endemic level of depression among rural residents. Endemic, what does that word mean? It means over time. Okay, so chronic depression, right? Epidemic is in the here and the now. Okay, the epidemic of COVID. Endemic means over a long period of time. Okay. What are the factors for the rural population with regard to depression? Maybe living in poverty, economic difficulties, maybe your isolation of where you live, insufficient number of healthcare workers or even specific healthcare workers. We know that the level of mental health illnesses is high in the rural population, substance abuse high. What if you don't have the resources to deal with that? Homelessness and poverty. We just covered this, but again, I've broken it down into the 6 or 8 bullets about homelessness and poverty that you need to know to be able to understand this concept. Okay, homelessness and poor outcomes, poor health outcomes, that's discussed in the first paragraph. Poor preventative health. I mean, homeless clients are simply trying to survive, right? And then here's some resources: temporary assistance for needy families, WIC, Social Security. Here's all resources, but others in a very negative way may beg for money, sell plasma, sell blood products, steal, sell drugs, prostitution, right? Their barriers are maybe unawareness of what's available to them, right? Not knowing what their options are. And here's reiterating, in working with the homeless, it's important to create a trusting environment. Therapeutic communication, therapeutic relationship building. They're mistrustful of the system, mistrustful of the people that they're trying to work, that are trying to work with them. Well, genders are are not relevant. The poverty rate for children under 18, 16.2%. And the poverty rate for people over 65 was almost 10%. So that's important to remember. So kids under 18 are much more at risk of living in poverty than the elderly. Not that they're not at risk, the elderly, but they're less at risk than the kids. And then this is important to remember. The greatest impact on a child's overall health status is the financial stability of the family. We talked about that in week 1. Remember that? It affects everything. Increased risk of disease, increased risk of injuries, lack of preventative health care, lack of proper nutrition, maybe lack of education. All right, but the stability of the family, the financial stability of the family has the greatest impact on a child's overall health status. I saw this in the schools day after day after day. So true. So there's your study guide. So does that help navigate how to go through it? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it
All
does
right.
help. Thank you.
Yeah, just go through the study guide, see what you understand, see what you don't understand, be able to apply each concept and think of some scenarios, clinical scenarios. What if you were presented with a migrant farm worker? What if you presented with a rural client in a clinic? What if you were working in the ER and somebody came in that was homeless? Right? What if you are trying to work with a family that has no insurance? What does that look like? Okay. So that's my review. It's just a jump start to get you guys going. And like I've said in class, if you do your due diligence and study on your own initially, then if there's any of these 12 concepts that you're just not grasping, give me a call or send me an email. Let's get together before your exam next week and review what you're not understanding. Okay? Happy to help you in any way. These are straightforward exams. They're not trick questions. They're just, it's straightforward. Okay? So if you have a good understanding of the concept guide, you'll do fine. And I don't mean just memorizing it. I mean being able to apply the knowledge to practice. Okay? Questions? All right.
Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. All right. You guys have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.